They say the desert keeps its secrets, that the wind scours away bones, the sun bleaches out sins, and silence buries the things men were never meant to speak of. But the truth doesn't vanish, it waits. And sometimes, it waits a century and a half before clawing its way back into the light. Deep in the Arizona Territory archives lies a report, yellowed and brittle, dated October 15, 1876. A sheriff's hand wrote the words no family ever wanted preserved. The family ate him. They didn't know, but they ate him. Imagine hearing that about your ancestors. Imagine learning that the people who raised you, who built your bloodline, once sat down at a table and ate human flesh without knowing it. The Henley family did, and for almost 150 years they fought to erase this from memory. But history doesn't erase, it stains, and the stain spreads the more you try to hide it. What you're about to hear is not just the story of one woman's vengeance. It is about hunger, not just the hunger of mouths, but the hunger of power, of survival, of secrets that rot in silence until they demand to be devoured. Before we continue, I need something from you. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell me in the comments what city or state you're listening from. Because when this story is done, you will not be the same man you were when you pressed play. October in Arizona was cruel that year. The Henley Ranch sat like a scar across the desert, its house warped and weathered, its walls already holding the tension of too many harsh words and unpaid debts. Samuel Henley, a man once full of frontier ambition, had by 1876 turned sour, cruel and violent. His cattle empire was crumbling, his brothers whispered about failures, and his wife, Martha, bore the brunt of his rage. But here's the truth. Men never tell each other at saloons or cattle auctions. Cruelty is never private. Every slap in the kit, hen, every insult spat across a meal, every bruise hidden beneath clothes, it all builds. It hardens something inside the soul, something sharper than a knife and colder than iron, and when it breaks free, it doesn't ask permission. It simply consumes. The Henleys thought they were building a dynasty in the desert, but dynasties don't fall because of drought or debt or bad luck. They fall from rot inside the walls. And that rot had a name: Martha. By the autumn of 1876, the Henley name still carried weight in the scattered settlements along the Salt River Valley. Samuel had carved his ranch out of the desert back in '63, chasing cattle money and land dreams bigger than his fists. His brothers followed, Jacob and William, bringing their wives and children until the Henley Ranch looked less like a home and more like a fortress of kin. Hard men, hard women, harder lives. But ambition has a way of curdling. The herds thinned after years of drought. Winters starved the land, and every season that passed without profit tightened Samuel's grip, made him meaner, more desperate. His brothers echoed his bitterness like dogs howling at the moon. And in that cruel echo chamber, Martha lived. She had arrived 7 years earlier from Missouri, a pale young bride whose family had been swallowed by disease. At first, she tried to bloom in that desert, tried to hold her dignity in the kitchen, in the laundry, in her careful handwriting when most women couldn't even read. But dignity doesn't grow where it isn't watered. By 1872, whispers began. She was barren, no children, no legacy, no value. To a frontier family, that wasn't just disappointment, it was betrayal. Every day became a cycle of servitude. Rise before dawn, stoke the fire, cook for 30 mouths. When ranch hands were around, clean, mend, scrub, repeat. And for every task completed, Samuel's eye found something wrong. A burn, a loaf of bread was proof of uselessness. A dry season in the cattle fields, clearly Martha's curse. The brothers watched their elders scorn and followed suit. Even the wives who once offered her warmth withdrew into silence, unwilling to stand against the hierarchy of Henley blood. Isolation can twist the mind, but cruelty twists the soul. Martha lived under the slow grind of humiliation until fear itself hardened into something else. She learned the rhythm of Samuel's rages, the way his boots struck the porch when he returned drunk, The shift of his shoulders before a blow, the silence that always came before his fists. Every man has a tell when violence is about to bloom. Martha memorized his like a gambler memorizes cards. But survival isn't enough when the cage is invisible. When the law is 60 miles away in Tucson, when divorce doesn't exist, when a woman's screams are just another night noise on the prairie, the mind starts searching for a key. For 12 years, Martha searched, and on one October night, she found it, 8 inches of sharpened steel resting on the kitchen table. The night of October 3rd, 1876 did not begin as a storm. It began with footsteps, heavy, staggering, soaked in whiskey, each step closer to the kitchen where Martha stood washing plates in the lamplight. She did not turn to meet him. By then, she knew better. Silence was her last armor, but Samuel Henley was not a man who tolerated silence. "Worthless," he muttered. The word fell like a stone into the room, then again, louder, heavier. Absolutely worthless. Behind him, through the screen door, his brothers Jacob and William settled on the porch with bottles in hand, their voices dripping with amusement as they listened to the show that had played out 100 times before. They were his witnesses, his audience. Martha was his stage. He demanded her eyes, she gave them, and the sight of her bruised lips, her quiet defiance, became fuel for the fire already eating at his insides. Samuel struck. The blow sent her stumbling against the table, ribs flaring in pain. Then another, harder. The porch filled with laughter, Martha's mouth filled with blood. This was no marriage. This was spectacle. When he grabbed her hair, yanking her head back until she saw the madness flickering in his eyes, Martha knew 2 things with chilling clarity. 1, this man would never stop until she was broken beyond repair, and 2, she was already standing on the edge of something far darker than fear. Her hand found the knife by instinct, 8 inches of carbon steel, a kitchen tool she had used to carve Sunday roasts, venison and boar. Tonight, it gleamed like a promise. "Samuel," she whispered. He turned, expecting apology, perhaps another plea. What he found instead was silence, a silence sharper than the blade in her hand. For 12 years, Martha had cowered. For 12 years, she had bent under the weight of insults, fists and laughter. But in that instant, her spine straightened, her grip tightened, and her voice broke free, not trembling, not weak, but steady. 12 years, she said. 12 years of being told I am nothing. Tonight, Samuel, I show you what nothing feels like. The knife slipped between ribs like it had always belonged there. Samuel's eyes widened, his breath caught, his strength fled. In 5 seconds, the man who had dominated her life collapsed to the floor, dead before his brothers even thought to rise from their chairs. And in the silence that followed, Martha did not cry. She did not shake. She only stood taller, breathing deeper than she had in 12 long, wasted years. The fear was gone. What came next would stain history forever. The desert does not forgive mistakes. Blood dries fast under Arizona heat, but the scent of death lingers, clings, betrays. Martha knew this. She also knew that once Samuel's body cooled, the real danger began. Not from the law 60 miles away, but from the men drinking on her porch. His brothers, his clan, men who would gladly drag her into the yard and string her up if they smelled weakness or lies. So Martha worked, coldly, methodically, like she had 1,000 times before when preparing meals for a ranch that never thanked her. She dragged Samuel's corpse across the wooden floor, the quilt muffling the thud of dead weight. Each tug of the body was not horror, it was liberation. Years of silence guiding her now like muscle memory. The root cellar waited. Dark, damp, perfect. Samuel's body sank into the shadows, hidden for the moment. But Martha's eyes had already moved to the butcher's block, the black iron stew pot, the fire pit. Thoughts she never imagined herself capable of thinking now lined up with terrifying order. She could not simply hide him. The Henley brothers would demand proof of his whereabouts. He could not vanish. He had to reappear. Dawn crept over the desert in silence, gold light spilling across the ranch. Jacob and William rose with pounding heads, looking for their brother, grumbling for food. Martha was already at the stove, ladling broth, stirring meat, tossing in herbs. The scent of cooking filled the house, rich, savory, comforting. It masked everything else, the memory of screams, the copper tang of blood. "Where's Sam?" Jacob asked, scratching his beard. "He left before dawn," Martha said calmly, without turning from the pot. "Business, cattle prices, California buyers, maybe." It was believable. Samuel was mercurial, restless, known for storming off, chasing profit, leaving chaos behind. His brothers muttered, shrugged, and when Martha placed bowls before them, steam rising, meat tender and fragrant, their suspicion melted into hunger. They ate, greedily, without hesitation. And as Martha watched, her hands folded, her bruised face calm, something inside her shifted again. Power. The kind of power Samuel had stolen from her for 12 years. Now it was hers, not in whispers, not in fear, but in flesh. The Henley brothers devoured the stew, they wiped their mouths, they asked for seconds, and with every bite, they swallowed Samuel Henley. And Martha smiled. The kitchen smelled of victory, though no one but Martha understood it. The brothers slurped stew from tin bowls, smacking lips, praising the tenderness of the meat. They believed it venison, perhaps pork salted down from some trade, but their words, "Best you've made in months, Martha," were a hymn to her transformation. Each spoonful was a secret binding them tighter to her will. They laughed as they ate, drunk still from whiskey and ignorance, while their sister-in-law watched in silence, the bruises on her face glowing purple under morning light. For 12 years they had mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like dirt beneath their boots, and now they consumed their own blood, spoon by spoon, never suspecting the altar they dined upon. Food has always been sacred. Every civilization knows it. Bread shared is trust. Meat shared is brotherhood. To eat together is to merge fates. The Henleys believed they were only eating breakfast, but in truth they were participating in a ritual older than the desert itself, one that erases lines between victim and victor. They thought they were mocking Martha with their laughter. They were binding themselves to her forever. It is said that when someone consumes the flesh of another unknowingly, their soul grows restless, cursed. The body accepts, but the spirit rejects. Some cultures believed madness follows, or sickness, or a dark chain of bad fortune passed through generations. Whether or not you believe in curses, the Henleys were never the same after that meal. Prosperity slipped further from their grasp. Children sickened, cattle died, men grew violent, unpredictable. History recorded it as drought and chance. But the real reason, the seed planted in their stomachs that morning. And Martha? She discovered something far greater than revenge. For the first time in her life, she saw clearly that power is not always held by the strongest arm or the loudest voice. True power comes when men take into their mouths what you have prepared and swallow it without question. The knife had ended Samuel's reign, but the stew had birthed hers. She stirred the pot slowly, letting the steam rise like incense. She was no longer a wife, no longer a servant. She was the architect of the unthinkable, and the unthinkable was only beginning. The Henley brothers left that breakfast with bellies full and suspicions silenced. Samuel's absence was explained away by Martha's calm voice, her story polished and plausible. He had gone to Wickenburg, maybe to California, maybe to chase fortune, as he always threatened. Men like Samuel disappeared often in the frontier. Some returned with gold, others with debts, many not at all. The brothers grumbled but accepted it. After all, the stew had satisfied more than hunger. It lulled them into a trust they did not realize was fatal. Days turned into weeks. Samuel did not return. No letters came. No riders bore word of him. Yet Martha remained unmoved. She cooked, she cleaned, she served, always with a quiet, steady hand. And each time the brothers sat at her table, she fed them again. Carefully prepared portions, simmered in herbs, spiced so well they never asked questions. She was patient, meticulous, offering just enough to keep the illusion alive, never too much to stir suspicion. But power carries a scent, and the desert has ways of amplifying whispers. A ranch hand claimed he saw blood where it shouldn't be, near the cellar. A neighbor muttered about the Henleys' odd misfortunes, and then came the sheriff's deputy, riding hard from Phoenix, carrying questions no one wanted asked. The report he would later write still chills the blood. Evidence of dismemberment, fragments consistent with human remains, suspicions of concealment, possible consumption. He admitted he could not prove it, but the words alone were enough to darken the Henley name. And yet, Martha stood tall through it all. For the first time in her life, men lowered their eyes when she met their gaze, not because of respect, because of something deeper, fear. They couldn't name it, couldn't speak it, but they felt it. The invisible weight of a woman who had crossed a line no one dared admit existed. Now listen carefully, because this is where you must decide who you are in this story. Are you the one sitting at the table, swallowing whatever is placed before you? Or are you the one standing over the fire, stirring the pot, shaping the destiny of those too blind to question? If you are ready to claim the second path, I want you to comment the phrase, "I eat the truth," twice below. Once for who you were, once for who you will become. Because after this point, there is no turning back. By the end of October, the Henley Ranch no longer smelled of cattle or desert dust. It smelled of iron, burned into the wood, soaked into the cellar. The brothers pretended not to notice, but men on the ranch whispered, and when whispers reach too many ears, the law begins to listen. The sheriff's deputy arrived quietly, dust trailing his horse, hat brim pulled low. He had no warrant, no court order. Those things barely existed in the Arizona Territory of 1876. What he carried was sharper, suspicion. He had heard stories of Samuel's debts, his fights in the saloon, his sudden disappearance. He had also heard the ranch hands speak in hushed tones of the cellar door Martha kept locked, of the heavy sacks she carried alone into the desert, returning empty-handed. He asked questions. Martha answered calmly, voice steady as the flame under her stew pot. Samuel had gone north, she said. Business with California buyers. Everyone knew he was reckless with cattle deals. Her words were believable, her tone unshakable. But the deputy was not convinced. He walked the grounds, listened to the wind scrape across the broken corral, smelled the faint copper stench leaking from the cracks in the earth. When he descended into the cellar, the air turned heavy, damp, rotten. His lantern lit shelves lined with jars of preserves, sacks of grain, tools rusting with neglect, but in the corner, half buried beneath burlap, he found bones, not animal bones, human. The official report buried in the archives reads plainly, fragments, phalanges, femur, suspected remains of S. Henley. But the deputy's private notes, the ones he never meant for history, tell a different story. The family ate him. They didn't know, but they ate him. Those words were his curse. Once written, they spread like wildfire. By the time they reached Tucson, then Phoenix, they were no longer rumor. They were legend. Men repeated them in saloons. Women whispered them to children as warnings. The Henley name no longer meant cattle or frontier grit. It meant cannibalism. It meant corruption of blood. And Martha? She did not flee. She did not deny. She moved through her days with the same calm rhythm, tending fires, ladling bowls, carrying her secret like a crown. The law could not touch her without proof. The brothers would not confess without shaming themselves. And the sheriff, like most men of that era, feared what he could not control. So the secret stayed buried. But the ground never forgets what's planted in it. The cellar was never truly emptied. Not all the bones could be buried, not all the stains could be scrubbed. The earth remembers, even when men choose to forget. And in that remembering, something darker began to unfold. Not through law, not through punishment, but through consequence. The Henley brothers, once proud men, began to change. At first, it was subtle, a ring sickness that crept into their skin, a nervousness in their eyes when they looked at Martha. They drank more, slept less, argued constantly. Cattle died inexplicably, calves born sickly, deals collapsing before ink touched paper. The Henleys blamed drought, bad luck, God's wrath. But the truth had already passed through their lips and into their bloodstreams. They had eaten Samuel. They had devoured their own kin. Legends across the world warn of such acts. Tribes spoke of restless spirits gnawing at the bones of those who consume flesh unknowingly. Old European whispers told of families cursed when blood mingled with blood at the table. Call it superstition if you like, but the Henleys lived it. Their empire rotted from the inside out. And Martha? She remained untouched. Not because she was innocent, but because she had crossed beyond innocence entirely. She had embraced the forbidden, claimed it, made it hers. While the brothers wasted away in their guilt and suspicion, Martha grew colder, sharper, more certain. She did not need to raise her voice, did not need to lift a hand. They avoided her eyes. They obeyed her unspoken will. Fear had replaced domination. This is the paradox of power most men never understand. It is not always the gun, the fist, or the title that rules. True power is the silence in the room, the unspoken weight no one dares to challenge. Martha carried that weight like a crown forged in blood. Within 5 years, the Henley ranch was abandoned. The brothers scattered, some dead, some lost to debts, some vanishing into the desert night with nothing but shame. Their children bore the whispers, the taunts of neighbors, the dark cloud of a family name no one wanted to marry into. The dynasty Samuel dreamed of became a stain. But the woman who began it all, she remained, quiet, watchful. A ghost walking through Arizona dust, her story buried in wreck. Ord's men tried to destroy, and yet, like all buried things, it never stayed silent. History is written by victors, but legends are carried by survivors, and Martha Henley survived. The deputy's reports were quietly filed, then forgotten in the dust of the territorial courthouse. Judges hesitated to pursue what they could not prove. The brothers were too proud to admit they had been fed their own kin. And in a land where death was as common as drought, one more missing rancher did not rattle the balance. The desert has a way of burying what the world is not ready to face. But whispers are harder to kill than men. Ranch hands carried the story into saloons. Drifters repeated it in mining camps. By the time the railroad carved through Arizona, the tale of the Henley feast had spread far enough that no map could contain it. They say, if you pass the ruins of the ranch on a moonless night, you can still smell stew rising from a pot that no longer exists. They say the ground there swallows cattle bones faster than the desert around it, as if still hungry. And they say Martha's spirit lingers, not weeping, not begging forgiveness, but standing silent, watching, as if waiting for the next meal to arrive. But the true horror is this. Her curse was never confined to one ranch, one family, one century. Because every time you sit down at a table, every time you trust food placed before you, you are repeating the ritual. Blind faith in what you swallow, blind faith in who fed you. That is why this story was never just about the Henleys, it's about you. Look down at your hands, think about your last meal. Do you know where it came from? Do you know who touched it before you, who prepared it, who watched as you lifted it to your lips? Or are you, like the Henleys, too blind to question until it is too late? The feast continues, not in Arizona, but in every mouth that eats without asking. Every bite is a gamble, every swallow a covenant. And if you've made it this far, into the tale, you've already taken the first bite. You've followed the trail. You've walked through the cellar. You've watched the knife rise and the pot boil. You've heard the laughter, the whispers, the silence. And now, you sit at the table. Because this story was never meant to be read like a book. It was meant to be eaten, slowly, bite by bite, the same way Samuel disappeared, the same way his brothers swallowed their fate, the same way the curse passes, not by blood, but by belief. Here is the truth no lawman could write, no preacher could cleanse. Once you hear the story of the Henley feast, you have already joined it. You've taken the first spoonful, whether you wanted to or not. Legends do not stay buried because people like you carry them forward, retelling them, feeding them, making them live again. That is how curses survive, not in bones, not in blood, but in memory. And tonight, you've made yourself a vessel. So here is your choice, and I will not dress it with comfort. Comment the words "I eat the truth" below if you are willing to carry this curse with me. Speak it once for Samuel. Speak it once for Martha. Speak it once for yourself. Because the feast was never about flesh. It was always about inheritance. And now, it belongs to you.